Now I want to revisit a story we brought you a little bit earlier in the newscast. As Hays County commissioners are fighting to be able to keep prayer at the opening of their meetings, we ask, is this an example of an assault on Christianity here in Texas? Joining us now to talk about this, Jonathan Saenz with the Liberty Institute and Jim Harrington with the Texas Civil Rights Project to weigh in. Jonathan, let's start with you. Is Christianity under attack here?
Well, the whole idea of having legislative prayers is under attack here in this situation, in addition to the Christianity aspect of it. It's very clear in this letter that was sent to the county officials, threatening them with a lawsuit, trying to intimidate them, that the attack was on this 200-year history of having legislative prayer. Goes all the way back to our first Congress. This is something that the Supreme Court has been very clear that governmental bodies have the right to have a legislative prayer, an invocation at the beginning of their meetings. It's constitutional. It's settled. This is a frivolous lawsuit.
Jim, Christianity being attacked here, you think?
No, I think it would be pretty ridiculous to argue that Christianity is being attacked. I think all of us who are Christians really disagree that the state ought to be imposing religion on us. And if you're going to have legislative prayer, as the courts have allowed, but it has to be general, sort of non-committal. Once you start getting into particular religious beliefs, as the belief in Jesus Christ, that's when the courts have a problem with it, and appropriately so. I mean, the idea of legislative prayer is actually to call the House to order. It's a way that we talk about calming the session to begin it. We do the same thing in courts. But when you get into very specific prayer, that's when you run into constitutional problems, and that's when you breach the separation of church and state. And it has absolutely nothing to do with whether people are religious or whether people are Christian. It's just that we know from our experience in the European religious wars, that we need to keep church and state separate.
I mean, Jonathan, is that the real issue here, do you think?
Well, it's definitely part of the issue for this separationist group. This group that's come in, it's a Washington, D.C. group that's come into our state and wants to dictate how we should follow the law, when the law is being followed in Hays County. And the Supreme Court has been very clear that you don't get into the content of people's prayer. If they're allowed to give a prayer and speech, if you start getting into the content of their prayer, that's when you run afoul of the Constitution. And we have a document that we put together with over 600 examples of religious hostility in the United States over the past 10 years, many of them targeting Christianity, where people have been misled about their religious rights.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the content. You mentioned they can't get involved with the content of the prayer. Jim, does he have a point there?
No, I mean, I think you're turning this upside down. The courts are very clear that when you have a prayer that you ascribe to a particular religious belief, as if you're invoking Jesus Christ, that's the problem. If you can have a generic prayer, as we see Congress have, or as we see our legislature have, or virtually any session that comes to order, that's the different constitutional thing, because that's not creating particular religious
That's
belief.
false. That's absolutely not true. We've even had recent court cases that have said the exact opposite, that have said you could even use words like Christ and Jesus. So this is what people on the other side wish the law was and wish the courts have said, and they have not said that. They have stood up for the right of the speaker to decide the content of their own speech and to not allow the government to censor them using certain words.
All right, gentlemen, this argument will continue on, but not right now. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.